We've all heard of the Area 51 raid coming up in September. The memes are pretty funny, but it does bring a lot of light and questions to what they could possibly be housing there. Tonight I'll be telling 5 stories from NoSleep. We will be starting things off with the story of a man who claims to have infiltrated Area 51. But as always, this video has even more to offer. Stories of psychological origin, a bad camping trip, a monster in the attic, and a bad hotel stay. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories. They are the ones who make these videos possible, and there are links to where you can find more of their work in the description. Remember, you can send stories to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoyed these hour-long videos, please be sure to drop a like rating, as it lets me know that you want more of them. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I've always been a fan of conspiracy theories, and it's not that I believe that the Earth is flat or we faked the moon landing, but they are fun to research and hear what people have to say about these things. Area 51 and aliens, however, have both been some of my favorites. So it was a no-brainer when my girlfriend told me she wanted to go to Nevada to visit her parents since her dad's health has been rapidly deteriorating. The flight from Seattle to Las Vegas was bumpy and full of turbulence, which didn't help the fact I have never been a fan of airplanes. Once we landed, her parents picked us up from the airport and took us to their tiny suburban home just north of the city. The whole ride I began researching Area 51. I wanted to know as much as possible before I journeyed there tonight. I decided I would set off at sunset, using her father's car since he can't drive anymore due to his Alzheimer's. I was able to get an idea of where the base is, since it's surprisingly a pretty popular tourist spot. Within a couple of hours, I'd arrived along approach road to the base. Now obviously I can't just walk onto the base, but I know a guy that used to work here. He said there were tunnels all through the desert that led to Area 51. All I had to do was plant a small explosive in the correct spot, and I should be able to get in. I parked the car on the side of the road and began walking. I glanced back at the car. It was almost impossible to see in the shadowy darkness that consumed the whole landscape. My friend, who I shall call Mike, gave me specific coordinates that I should plant the explosives. Mike is a former soldier who was stationed here on the base. He was kicked out of the Air Force a few years back and refused to tell me why. When I had first told Mike about my idea, he pleaded with me not to go because it's not what you think, and those things will haunt you. Mike has been having some mental health issues for a long time now, so I brushed his comments off as him being crazy and not knowing what he's honestly talking about. Nonetheless, Mike, after a few beers, explained I could get in using the explosives. It was about midnight by the time I reached Mike's coordinates. I dug a hole with my hands into the sand and placed the bombs inside. I then lit the fuse with my rusty lighter and bolted behind a large nearby rock. The explosion was loud and rocked the environment, and I knew I had to hurry since someone would be coming to check this out. After carefully inspecting the small newly formed crater, I noticed the rusted steel hatch door. I was honestly shocked to see that Mike was right, and deep down, I wish he had lied, so I could have just gone home. The door creaked open, revealing a ladder that goes down into darkness. I used my iPhone for light as I descended into the darkness below. Shortly after my feet landing firmly on the ground, I dropped into a small dimly lit hallway that stank of antiseptic, and the walls were made of grayish stone-like material. There was a sign on the wall, and it read, Homey Airport Facility, with an arrow pointing to the left, and Groom Lake Research and Development Site, with an arrow to the right. After some time, I decided to follow the sign to Groom Lake. After some time walking the empty hall for what seemed like forever, I reached a steel door with a large sign saying, Groom Lake Research and Development. The door was hard to open, but after pushing against it with my side, I was able to get in. Before me was a maze of white-walled halls. I had no idea where I was going to go. Next, I decided to start aimlessly walking, and soon stood before me was a large room with a transparent window. It looked like a break room by the stove, microwave, and table, amongst other things, but I couldn't help but notice the small plastic card sitting on the table. And it was at that moment I knew I was a moron for thinking I would be able to see all the things I wanted to see without an ID card. The name on the ID was Dr. Richard Elder. Richard was a middle-aged, slightly overweight man with short, balding hair, but what stood out to me was his security level. It read level X. As far as I was aware, there were only 3 security levels, A, B, and C. But this was new to me. I decided I would see what I could get into with this, so I entered the elevator. On the side of the elevator was a screen and a QR code reader. I put my ID under the reader, and a slight buzz was made as the screen displayed floors for each security level. And then at the bottom was labeled Project X. I selected this mysterious floor, and the elevator hummed as it descended. After about 5 minutes, the elevator halted to a screeching stop as the doors opened. I was greeted by poorly lit white walls, leading to a sizable, airtight steel door. I scanned the keycard, and it opened, revealing a large control room, but my eyes immediately were fixated on a large sign saying, Level X Creature Detainment Facility. I had no idea what that sign meant, but I just had to see. Inside were countless prison-like cells, except noticeably more substantial, and the bars appeared to be much more robust than what you would see in any ordinary prison. All the cells were empty except for one on end. This cell was noticeably more substantial than all the other cells, and I couldn't see the other end of it, but I knew something was in there. I could hear it. Like a stupid idiot, I turned on my phone's flashlight and began scanning the cell. I blacked out. I don't know how long I was out for, but I'd made a terrible mistake. I woke to an alarm and flashing red and white lights. I looked up and saw a huge sign that read, Protective headgear must be worn inside the detainment facility. The door leading to the cell area got ripped off its hinges, thrown about 50 feet in the opposite direction. I needed to get out of here. It's not safe with this thing lurking around. As soon as I reached the main level of the facility, a musty smell of smoke consumed me. It appears the facility is running off a backup generator, now as the lights are incredibly dim, and the glistening red alarm lights overshadowed the LED lights on the walls. As I walked, I noticed shattered glass and bullet holes becoming more and more frequent, and then I saw a body limp against the wall. It looked like security. I approached the man to inspect him, and I couldn't help but vomit upon seeing his condition. A huge bite was taken out of his neck, revealing muscle and tissue, and the man's face was mangled and twisted in ways not humanly possible. His facial expression described pure horror. I did this, I thought. I caused this man to lose his life, and it's all my fault. I needed to leave. I lingered on passing blood-splattered walls, and dead scientists, security, pilots, and people of other various careers on base, all with a signature bite mark on their neck. I found the ladder I used to enter. I made it back to my car in 10 minutes. I need to leave, and I need to get my family and leave this godforsaken place. On my way out, I passed an F-35 jet crashed in the desert. The aircraft was engulfed in flames. At least they died quickly and painlessly, unlike the people that thing killed. Soon I passed by a tan Humvee, with no occupants to be found except for the gunner, who had been bitten in the neck, and his body looked like his blood had been drained from his body. The goddamn thing made it out. It's been a few weeks since the incident, and I've been trying not to think about it. I've been having trouble sleeping even though that thing can't get to me. Nothing was ever told to the public, and the Air Force made a statement claiming over 200 people lost their life due to a massive fire that broke out. None of the families were allowed to see the bodies of their loved ones. I'm not sure what excuse they gave them, but whatever it was, I'm sure it was complete bullshit. I've been seeing more and more news reports about people being bitten in the neck and sucked of all their blood. Lincoln County blamed rabid dogs, but I know the truth. The truth that that thing is still out there in the Nevada desert. I don't think I'm me anymore. Not really. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. I hope I am, because the alternative is bad. About half a year ago, something happened to me that was so insane, so unbelievable that, well, no one believed me. You probably won't either, but I have to leave something behind to tell my story before I go, before I'm gone. To a jail, to an asylum, or something else. It happened on one of my evening runs. I've had people call me an idiot for jogging at night, and for the longest time, I've just laughed them off. It's rarer than most people think to just get attacked by a stranger. Usually it's someone you know, someone you love, And when it's someone familiar like that, they're going to figure out a way to get you alone, even if you keep your exercise under the sun. Besides, I live in a relatively affluent neighborhood, in the kind of place where crime is something that happens to other people. Imagine me, a man in his mid-30s, wearing glasses and cursed with prematurely graying hair, migrating from top to bottom. I'm running a sedate pace, on a concrete path that winds through my local park, phone held out in front so I can use it as a flashlight. The shadows are strange, shifting and bobbing, as my handheld light catches trees and branches, throwing out dark, twisted shapes around me as I go. I've been running this path for so long now, that its very eeriness is a comfort. Like a scary movie you've watched enough to remember each scene line for line. That's when I saw it. The thing. The being. Huge. As wide as it was tall, and it was tall. I couldn't make out any details. It was simply too dark. The creature too far away for me to properly see anything, except a dark silhouette, dimly visible against a far-off park light. I wouldn't have even seen that, I don't think, if it hadn't been on the same path as me, moving at a speed I never could have matched, moving towards me. The realization that the dark shape and I would meet flooded me with raw fear, and my heart raced in a way that held nothing to do with physical exertion. Stupidly, I ignored that fear, that God-given gift which allows man to recognize that which may cause him harm, and provides him with the motivation and energy to run like hell in the opposite direction when he sees it. I don't believe in monsters, you see. Or I didn't. It had to be a man. I told myself at the time, a really big man. They exist. I know they do. People large enough to make the rest of us look small and weak by comparison. Just watch basketball. Or Game of Thrones. Just a very large man, out for a nice late-night run through the park. I never even considered that it might be a bear, or some other kind of dangerous animal. The area I live in is too urban, too developed. Nothing larger than a squirrel had been seen around there in decades. So the large man ran towards me, and I ran towards it, my breathing growing sharp and erratic, a sense of absolute dread filling me up like a water balloon, sucked around a tap of liquid fear. That terror built, and built, until I felt as if just one more drop might pop me, and I would turn around and run, screaming like a little girl. I wish I had. I really, really wish I had. The closer I got, the more I realized how incredibly wrong I'd been. What came towards me wasn't a man at all. It was a woman. A small woman. Petite even. Her long hair bunched up in a ponytail behind a cap with a Superman logo on it, despite the utter lack of sun. All at once, my dread turned to embarrassed confusion. How had I mistaken her so completely? The shadows, I'd rationalized. A confusing perspective, that's all. As she came close, I turned the harsh white light from my phone away, so I wouldn't blind her, and raised a hand in quiet greeting. Already I had shifted my thoughts away from monsters, to a more mundane curiosity. No one else, as far as I knew, ran the same path as me this late, and so meeting her here now was interesting. She responded with a wave of her own, along with a small smile. We came together side by side, her on my left, our shoulders practically touching. I wonder what it might be like to meet her again, along this path. I was single, and I thought she was pretty, and for the briefest moment, I imagined a montage of us slowly developing a connection as we met each other again and again, over weeks or months of shared nighttime runs. It would make for a good romance movie, I thought, if it hadn't already been made. Then she twisted, jerking with unnatural motion to grab me around the neck. We stopped, in a way that shouldn't have even been possible. One instant, we were running in opposite directions. The next, we were standing motionless, her hand around my throat, holding me still with iron strength. I gasped and gagged, too shocked and stunned to fully understand what was happening. And then something pulled at me. Pulled at me. And I don't just mean my body. I mean me, in a way I simply can't even begin to describe. When I think of that moment, all I can imagine is a young kid, sucking loudly at a milkshake through a straw. But the metaphor doesn't even approach the sensation I experienced. My vision faltered, and I blacked out for what I'm pretty sure was only moments. When I came to, I was alone, and on the ground, alone and scared. Alone and confused, but alone. The woman was gone. I picked up my phone and sprinted home, faster than I ever had before. And I don't mean that as an exaggeration. I mean that literally. I track my runs using my phone's GPS, and it had been pretty easy for me to check. And then, life went on, like nothing had happened. I don't know that I can explain how horrible that feels, to have something so completely, unimaginably strange and terrifying happen, and for it not to matter in the slightest. If you've ever lost a loved one, you probably understand what I mean. It feels like something should give, should shift under the momentous weight of what has happened, but the world is simply too big and uncaring to pay much mind to something so small as a death, or what happened to me, at first anyway. I made an appointment with my doctor and asked for a check-over. I'd vaguely encouraged her to focus on my neck, where the woman with the Superman hat had grasped me, but apparently that had left no mark because she'd found nothing out of the ordinary. According to her, I was in perfect health. I told the story to my friends, but they just laughed, asking me whether I'd emptied out my small stockpile of shrooms before the run. After a few months of absolutely nothing strange happening, I even believed them. I started to run again after that. It was horrible at first, and I found myself jumping at every shadow which, as you can probably guess. I made myself reacclimatize to it, forcing myself to believe my fear was irrational, faking it until I eventually made it, locking the memory away so I could get on with my life. Then I started losing time. Hours of memory simply erased from my mind. I'd be at home, or leaving work, or eating lunch or whatever, and then I'd be somewhere else. Somewhere I didn't remember going. A street I didn't recognize, a shop I'd never been to. Once I even ended up in a park, late at night, and for a moment, I thought it was the usual one that I ran through. It wasn't, as it turned out, just a random park. And those were only the times I actually realized something wasn't right. According to the psychologist I started seeing, I had something called dissociative amnesia, and it was likely that most of the time I didn't even notice that I'd forgotten things. This was because, well, I'd forgotten them. And it's hard to notice a thing you don't remember without explicit evidence that contradicts your own personal timeline. According to him, I'd probably been suffering with this condition my entire life, and just never knew until now. I don't think I believe him. He can't be right. Not about something so essential. Can he? God, I want him to be right. Please, please just let me be crazy. People have gone missing. Lots of them. Enough that our local newspaper had a reoccurring story. A kind of perpetual article. They update with fresh victims on a weekly basis. They call the person responsible the Vanisher, because no one has ever found a body. Some say that the Vanisher doesn't really exist, that all that's happening is an unusually large number of people deciding to run away to Canada, or whatever. They say that the publicity itself is what's driving people to vanish, troublemakers hoping to stir the pot. I know better. I think I might be the Vanisher. Or not me, but what I am. Shit. This is hard to explain. I feel crazy even thinking about it. Typing it out just adds the word batshit as an adjective. But it's good that it's insane. Insanity is the only thing that gives me hope, at this point. I swear I don't remember doing anything to anyone, but about the same time folks started going missing, I started dreaming about people and places I never knew. I'd never been to. Random faces, I thought, until one of them appeared right in front of me, on the TV. A mother, crying, desperately asking for people to come forwards with information about her son, claiming she'd pay any ransom the kidnapper wanted, so long as she got her boy back safe. I recognized her from my dreams. That prompted a search, on my part, an investigation into the people who'd disappeared, into their family and friends. I watched video after video, read article after article, anything with pictures or footage of people the Vanisher's victims might have known. I recognized far too many of them, even though I'd never seen them before in my life. I even guessed their names before reading them. How? How could I possibly know them? Dark thoughts imagined me as the serial killer, psychotically killing people during my blackouts, like I was in some cheesy crime serial. But even if that was happening, even if I was a modern-day Jekyll and Hyde, How the fuck did I know their family members? Was I casing them? Stalking them? Surely there wasn't enough time for that, and the hours lost to me. In my search, which began calm and rational, only to devolve into something mad and desperate, I found a web article claiming that the Vanisher wasn't new, that he, or she, had been active for years without anyone noticing, albeit on a much smaller scale. Desperate to find some evidence that would prove I was wrong, that I had nothing to do with what was happening, I clicked the link, turning blue purple. To my horror, the picture was a selfie of 3 women, smiling happily as they pressed their cheeks against each other. I don't know that I would have recognized the woman in the middle if she hadn't been wearing a cap. One with a Superman logo on it. Her name was Haley, and she'd gone missing 5 years ago. The picture on the website was the last ever taken of her, taken mere hours before she left her friends to go home, never to be seen again, except by me, on the night she'd attacked, the night I'd convinced myself had never happened. The discovery took place over a month ago, according to the calendar on this computer, and since then I've been losing more and more time. I'm disappearing, fading away. I went to my sister, desperate to find someone who could help me, an ally, someone to hold on to, a shoulder to cry into, someone who could explain that I was wrong, that everything was okay. I can't believe I was so selfish. She let me into her house, and I closed the door behind me as I stepped inside. Houses have a smell to them, not bad usually, but unique, like a fingerprint. My sister's house smells of old wood and popcorn, and as that scent, familiar from countless movie nights, wafted over me, I relaxed. My last recollection of that day was my hand, outstretched and reaching for her. She was crying, though I didn't understand why. Later, I don't know when exactly, I was walking inside a mall when I saw my sister's face staring back at me from a newsstand. Family torn apart as Vanisher continues spree, the headline read. The one her face was plastered under. This was the article I described earlier, the one the paper keeps updated with the latest victims. It wasn't just my sister on that page. My own face was there too, a smaller picture, about halfway down, nestled amidst the grid of those other victims, the lost. Only I'm not a victim, am I? I tried to scream, to shout out that I wasn't missing, that I was standing right there, right in the middle of the crowd, but the words never came out. After briefly looking over the stand, I just stepped away, uninterested in my own damn disappearance. I caught a reflection in a window as I passed by, and watched with abject horror as I idly examined myself in it. A complete stranger, a man I'd never seen before, stood in my place, checking his hair. Once more I attempted to shout, but once more the sound refused to escape from my mind into reality. I simply continued walking along the street, hands comfortably cozy inside the pockets on my jeans that were far tighter than any I'd have previously felt comfortable wearing. My thoughts were muddled and confused. The stranger's actions felt like my own, right up until I directly tried to oppose them. Then I felt trapped, a passenger in a body that was, and wasn't, my own. Eventually, the world dulled, then outright vanished. A few hours ago, I awoke, lying on top of a public bench and covered in old newspaper, a dog's lead grasped in my hand. I have no memory of how I got there, and the dog I didn't know yapped and growled at me until I left. I went to a nearby library, looking for somewhere warm, and hopped onto a computer, the one I'm at right now. I spent the last hour writing this out, trying to sort through my thoughts, to leave behind an explanation. I hear voices screaming in the back of my head, so quiet but so loud. I think they've been there for a while, except I've only just now noticed. I think I recognize one of them more than the others. Amber, sis, if you can see me typing this, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The next time I fade away, I don't think I'm coming back. Not really. I think I'm going to be one of the screaming voices. I hope I'm insane. I hope that the next time I wake, I'll be wearing a straitjacket and stuck inside a padded white cell. But I don't think I will. I'm so fucking scared. I'm a 22-year-old male who lives in a small house, surrounded by miles of expansive fields and greens. I work as a financial advisor, and I'm a huge fan of the countryside. So as soon as I could afford to move out, I did. The listing for this house indicated that there were 2 bedrooms, 1 living area, 1 kitchen, and 1 bathroom. Everything was kept on 1 floor. Then there was a hatch on the ceiling near the back of the house that led into the attic. The price was extremely affordable, and the location was stellar, so without hesitating, I got in contact with the family living there and took them up on their offer. They were interested in moving to the city for their kids' education and needed to move quickly before the school year began. I had been in this house for 2 weeks when the noises started coming. It started one evening when I was sitting on the sofa watching TV at about 8 p.m. when I heard a quiet rustling sound coming from above. It was the sound of something scurrying across the floor, almost as if it were a mouse. Not bothered and simply attributing the noise to a mouse, I carried on watching TV as per usual. However, not 15 minutes later, I heard a similar sound once again, but this time it was audibly louder, sounding like soft footsteps instead. Annoyed, I figured there must have been multiple insects and mice in the attic, and chastised myself for not getting an inspection done before moving in. The exterminator nearby was out for the evening, so I set a reminder on my phone to set an appointment with him as soon as possible to sort the issue out. I'm not easily scared by rodents and insects, but I certainly have heard horror stories about what uncontrolled mice can do to a home, so I was looking to get rid of them. Once the reminder was set, I was comforted in knowing the problem would soon be gone. I went back to relaxing and winding down for the evening, slowly drifting out to the soothing sounds coming from the TV. Suddenly, I heard a huge crash and bolted upright, jumping out of my groggy state. I checked the time, and it was 9:30 p.m. The sound had come from the attic, and sounded like something had just been shattered on the floor. Knowing there was nothing of mine in there, I started to think about what could have made that sound. I was getting anxious, as this was starting to sound less and less like mice, and more like a large animal living up in the attic. I needed to get the issue solved once and for all, and before the thing started to break whatever was left in the attic by the previous owners. Acting on this, I walked to the closet in my bedroom, where I kept my old Little League baseball bat, and headed over to the hatch. Grabbing my phone and turning on the flashlight, I illuminated the dark on the ceiling. To get up to the attic, you need to pull down and reveal a foldable ladder that you could climb to go up. I sighed, annoyed by the disturbance to my evening, and stood up tall to reach the hatch. Just as my hand touched it, something from the attic seemed to have jumped on top of the hatch, because the wooden door pushed downwards, like a large animal was standing on it. I could hear a loud growl coming from up, signifying that there was indeed a massive animal in my attic. Having been brought up in the country myself, I wasn't a stranger to animals roaming around freely, and was rather quite comfortable around them. Unfazed, I noticed that whatever was on the hatch seemed to have walked off, so I reached up once again and pulled the retractable ladder down. I climbed up the ladder and stepped into the attic, which was quite spacious and tall enough for me to stand fully upright. I shined my flashlight around the room, trying to identify where this animal was hiding when I found it. Or rather, when it found me. It was this beast, the size of a small bear, hunched on all fours with razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes were 2 bright blue circles, each roughly 6 inches in diameter. The beast had a mouthful of teeth as small as thumbtacks, but as sharp as a razor. It was salivating, looking greedily at me, almost as if it wanted to use me as a meal. Horrified, I jumped back and shouted, letting out a string of curse words I didn't even know I had in me. The beast raised itself on all fours and let out a guttural shriek. That's what confirmed that this was no ordinary animal. It seemed like a crossbreed between multiple animals, with ominous, dark energy radiating from it. It screamed and lunged straight at me, mouth wide open, ready to close down on me. I'm ashamed to say that I froze. It was the fight or flight response that saved me. My hands took over and swung, hitting the beast with a satisfying impact. The beast howled and staggered back, and I took this time to gather my instincts and follow up on the staggering beast. I jumped forward and swung again, eyes becoming blinded by fear. It just kept swinging over and over, even after I knew the beast was no longer moving. The sounds of its waning howls echoed through my ears, as it kept trying to fight back, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins overpowered it. In shock, I stood over the dead beast with horror and fear. I had never seen anything like it, and it was sure to give me nightmares for as long as I will live. I grabbed the beast by its neck and lugged it over to the corner of the attic. I didn't want to take it out because it might attract too much attention from people passing by. And considering I had no use for the attic, it would be the perfect place to keep it. That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this unsure what to do because just an hour ago, I started hearing faint, soft footsteps coming from the attic. I think there are more of them. I run a private campground. My family has owned it for 3 generations now. It's about 300 acres. Most of that shaded by forest, and the rest is an open field. We host events, like dog clubs, music festivals, etc. We've also got open camping weekends throughout the year, and in the height of summer we're open full-time for general camping. A lot of people take advantage of that. It's a cheap and pleasant vacation. Hammocks get erected in the trees. Grills get unloaded from the backs of trucks. There's some pretty elaborate setups from the people that come back year after year. The return campers are smart. They know what they're doing. Everyone knows their job when they roll in. They unload as a group. Tents start to go up. Community areas and kitchens go in the same place year after year, where they've found the land suits their setup best. Tent locations might change, but every camper knows where their tent is going in their allotted land. It's a far cry from the disheveled masses that show up and simply expect everything to work out with no prior planning. By noon on setup day, the experienced campers are sitting under their day shades, sipping beer, while the newbies are relocating tents because they didn't leave enough room for walkways. I've tried to help. I put together a guide that everyone receives in the mail once I have their registration info and payment. Sure, the postage is a bit of an expense, but I feel having a hard copy makes them more likely to read it. Not having to fill out as much paperwork with the police is worth the money. I've titled the brochure, How to Survive Your Camping Experience. I wish people would take that name more seriously. The first page is full of practical advice. Stuff like 1. Have a sturdy, waterproof container that holds a spare change of clothes and a blanket. This will ensure you have something warm and dry if your tent floods. 2. Place solar lights near your tent stakes. This will keep people from tripping over them or the ropes at night. 3. If the ground is soft from heavy rain, reinforce tent stakes either by weighing them down or by using longer stakes. They can get pulled out of the ground by a strong wind, otherwise. 4. When planning your camp, locate 3 extra feet per tent. This leaves room for ropes and stakes. The second page is advice more specific to the area. This campsite has been in the family for generations after all, and a parcel of land obtains a sort of significance when it's been passed down from hair to hair. It is an old place in the world, perhaps not an ancient place, but old enough to have attracted the attention of those things that prefer old places to make their homes. We will have to sell the campsite before it becomes an ancient place, as it will be unusable at that point. But there are still many generations to go before that happens. This is the part that the new campers don't take seriously. They think it's a prank, some little joke of the reclusive camp manager, who perhaps doesn't spend much time around other people. The experienced campers try to tell them otherwise, but they don't listen. I feel my rules aren't onerous. Here's a sampling. 1. If you hear something trying to enter your tent at night, sit up and say in a clear, calm voice that you are not receiving visitors, but it is welcome to visit in the morning. If a stranger appears the next day asking for entrance to your camp, invite them in and give them food and drinks. This will give you good luck for the rest of your stay. 2. Fairy rings are generally benign. If there are the remains of a small animal inside the ring, however, inform camp management immediately. 3. Don't follow the lights. I can't believe I even have to say this one. Don't follow them. 4. If you see a group of people dancing in a circle around a fire, you may join them. If they welcome you in, dance with them until the music ends. Do not look at the musicians. If they do not welcome you, but instead stop and stare, back away slowly and then leave. If they follow you, you can try to run, but it is likely already too late. Pray that death comes swiftly. I confess it's a haphazard list, but there's a lot of vicious things out there, and they all function in slightly different ways. I do some things as part of camp management in an effort to minimize the danger of my campers. We set out traps for the creatures stupid enough to fall into them. so they can be dispatched to my uncle and his 2 sons. We're closed during Pentecost, on Midsummer Day, and other significant times of the year, but we can't do everything. We can't save people from themselves. Every morning I circle the camp on a 4-wheeler. My staff does the same, a couple times a day. We look for any new developments on the land, a tree that needs pulled down for example, and campers know they can hail any of us if they need something. I leave directly after I finish my breakfast and a cup of coffee. My house is on the campsite, so it's especially easy for me to take the morning shift. There's never many people awake yet, so it was especially noticeable when I saw a man approaching me ahead, walking down the middle of the road. He looked unremarkable, they always do, but he walked slowly and deliberately, his head bowed so that it was difficult to see his face, and he carried before him in both hands a human skull. I pulled the 4-wheeler over and waited, my stomach twisting with fear. Rule number 12. If you're approached by a man offering you a drink from a cup made out of a human skull, accept. It will taste foul, and you will not be able to eat without vomiting for the next 24 hours. But this is better than what he will do to you if you refuse. I have drunk from the cup before. It is how I learned of his existence, and subsequently added him to the rules. He stopped me on the road, and at the time, I thought he was a camper needing assistance, until he handed me the skull cup and made me drink. I did, as I had already learned when a being of power asks something of you, it is better to comply. It may not be enough to save you. Sometimes they invite you to partake in your own demise, but the odds of compliance are better. He lifted the cup to my lips, and I drank. One swallow, another. He kept the cup there. His thin fingers brushed my hair back when it slipped past my ear, and I drank it in entirety. The water inside tasted bitter and salty. My stomach twisted and I swallowed hard, struggling to keep it down. "Thank you for the drink," I said when I was done, trying to sound sincere. He knew I lied, for he smiled briefly in wry humor, his dark eyes flashing with cold amusement. "It was wise to not refuse," he replied. He told me what he would have done had I not drunk, and my insides crawled with horror as he spoke, and I wanted him to stop, but to interrupt would have been a dire insult. His words were etched into my memories, and for days after I wept whenever I thought of the fate I had so narrowly avoided. I still feel cold and small when I think of the things he told me. That evening, I threw up my dinner. I threw up the crackers I ate. I even threw up water. Finally, I stopped eating and drinking altogether and waited a full day to try again. I was weak and miserable, but I survived. Now seeing the man approaching on the road, I mentally cursed my misfortune. This was our busy time of year. I couldn't afford to be sick for a day. He stopped just before he reached me, raised a hand and beckoned for me to come closer. He didn't raise his head until I stood just across from him, and when he did, he flashed that thin, dry smile at seeing the expression of dread on my face. "Are you not thirsty?" He asked mockingly. "Not particularly, but if you wish to offer me a drink, I will not be so rude as to refuse." My heart hammered in my chest. "Let him release me," I silently pleaded. He put a hand over the top of the skull, covering up the carved opening and the water inside. "Be at ease. I did not come to offer you a drink. I came to give you a warning. Some of your charges have conducted business with the children." I stood there, staring blankly at him in incomprehension. He sighed, almost imperceptibly, and even though his expression did not change, I felt the weight of his disapproval when he spoke next. These ancient beings do not enjoy having to explain themselves. "The children with no wagon," he said, speaking slowly, as if that would help me understand. "Someone bought ice from them." "Oh," I said. "Oh God." "He won't save them." The man walked past me, his shoulder brushing against mine as he did. "No one will." Rule number 18. You can buy ice from the children that approach your camp, only if they have a wagon. Those are the children of other campers trying to make some extra spending money. They only upcharge by a few dollars, so consider tipping. If a group of children approach without a wagon, do not buy from them. Act like they don't exist. They will eventually leave. It wasn't until he was almost out of sight that I realized I didn't have any idea which campsite had purchased the ice, and there were a lot of people here right now. I did the dumb thing. I jumped on the 4-wheeler, turned it around, and went after him. I pulled up along the side of the road, a respectful distance away, and called out to him. "Hey, What campsite was it? He paused almost imperceptibly. Are you thirsty after all? He asked, and even though his words were mild, I understood it for the threat it was. Nope, I'm good. Sorry for bothering you. I drove away before he changed his mind on granting me mercy. This was a terrible dilemma for me. I hadn't had anyone buy from the children without wagons before. Most people find their silent stares creepy, and the normal children are pretty aggressive with their ice routes anyway, so that no one needs ice by the time those other children show up. I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea how to undo what had been done. There was, however, someone I could ask. I went to my most senior camp. They're a group of friends that have been camping here for over 2 decades. The members have changed, to the point that the founders have all been replaced. But they've kept the traditions and are willing to work with me. As a result, I've given them the best campsite. It's up on a hill, nestled in a clear spot amongst the trees, so that their camp has shade most of the day, and there's spots to hang hammocks. A gas line runs up the hill, so I have to keep part of it free of trees, which funnels the breeze straight into their camp. It's noticeably cooler there than the rest of the site. It's also the most dangerous. I heard their shouting before I arrived. I slowed, cutting the noise of the engine down enough that I could make out words. I needn't have bothered. It was nothing but cursing. I couldn't tell if it was inter-camp dispute. Doubtful. They kept the drama to a minimum. Or if they were angry at another group. Plausible. They had a couple feuds going on with the younger camps. Or if it was something else. Bracing myself, I hopped off the vehicle and walked in past the line of tents that marked their boundary. There were 5 people in the common area, clustered around the beer kegs. They had a cooler that was outfitted with 4 taps, and they ran lines up through a steel plate that was packed with ice, providing access with chilled beer from the tap at any time. The kegs were all homebrew. Right now, they had all 4 taps open, and dark liquid was spilling out onto the ground. There was an odd smell in the air that turned my stomach. Like a butcher's shop, I thought, finally placing the smell. Is that blood? I ventured walking closer. Yes. The woman that did the brewing kicked one of the kegs. All of them are blood. I told him I've come to talk to the thing in the dark. I had a question, I said, and I could also ask about the kegs while I was at it. Sure. She jerked her head at the back of their camp, where the trees crowded in close enough so that their shadows overlapped, and the forest floor was noticeably darker under the lattice of their branches. We haven't seen the solars go out all week though, so maybe it's not home. Rule number 10. Keep track of what time the charge on the solar lights typically runs out. If the solars go out before them, do not leave your tent until sunup. Do not open the tent, not even to look. Stay in your tent, try to sleep, and wait for daybreak. I crept into the forest, wincing at the branches that cracked under my feet. Some of the creatures in the campsite were less malevolent than others. So long as they were respected, they wouldn't kill you, or even seriously harm you. I'd spoken to the creature in the dark only once before, when I thought to put the senior camp near its lair. I asked if their proximity would disturb it. It replied that they would not, but nor would it hesitate to take any of them, were they out in the open when it passed by. I don't know what happens to the people it takes. Their bodies are never found. The entire camp dreams of dying, however, of slow and torturous death in whatever manner they fear most. I dream of the little girl and the beast, and when I wake, I know that I'm going to be talking to the police yet again. The creature's lair is nothing more than a mound of broken branches, easily mistaken for a pile of stacked debris. There are some signs, however. The air grows colder as you approach, sound falls away, encasing you in silence, so that the only thing you hear is your own heartbeat. Mine was growing steadily faster as I drew near, and it felt like the darkness in between the piled branches was reaching out, gathering up all the light and dragging it to its doom. Flowers littered the forest floor, the white, parasitic ones with bowed heads, feeding on the tree roots running below the barren soil. "Excuse me?" I whispered, my voice cracking. I coughed and tried again. "Sorry to bother you, but I have a question." A long silence. I waited, wondering if this was in vain, and perhaps the creature wasn't there. Then it spoke, and its words were rough, like stones rolling against each other, and I winced in pain. For it felt like my head was between those stones, and my skull would crack under their weight. It asked me what I wished to know. I told it about the children, that someone had bought ice from them, and also about the kegs, as an afterthought. The children are displeased by their lack of prey, it finally replied, and I pressed my fingers against the bones near my ear, as if that could help relieve the pressure. They rejoice at finally being given an opportunity. To do what? The pile of branches shifted. The earth shifted, and I stumbled, realizing in sudden terror that that small lump of debris was not nearly enough to contain the creature inside, and it was far larger, and perhaps far more terrible than I'd imagined. Its shrug had nearly thrown me to the ground. The kegs are just the start, it sighed. More will suffer, all will suffer, and then the dying will begin. My entire campsite was at risk. I felt cold inside. I could evacuate, I thought. I could claim there was something, a gas line rupture, disease outbreak. There were some options available that would explain why I was throwing everyone out. But then what about my livelihood? Would people return? I'm a little ashamed that greed factored into my choices. But this campsite has been in my family for 3 generations, and I wasn't going to ruin it all now. Eliminate the one that started it. The ground bucked, violently, and I was thrown to my hands and knees. Everything else will unravel. I stumbled to my feet, thanking it profusely. I gibbered my apologies for disturbing it, and my gratitude for its advice. Then I fled, fighting the urge to look back the entire time. Eliminate the one that started it. Those words rattled around in my head as I went from campsite to campsite, asking if they'd bought ice from children today. I received quizzical looks from the newer campers, but the older ones answered solemnly, understanding the gravity of my question. They'd read the rules. Finally, I found the camp that bought the ice, and they identified the person that had made the purchase. He was elsewhere at the moment, but I could stop by later, they suggested. I said it was fine. I wasn't ready to talk to him. I wasn't ready to take the creature in the dark's advice. I thought, how bad could it be? It was only just the beginning. Perhaps I could find some other way to resolve the situation. I spent the evening digging through my books of camp management and folklore, trying to find some sort of ritual or appeasement I could try. Yet the creature said that the children were tired of not having prey I denied them with my rules, and that this would only get worse and worse until people started dying, that everyone was in danger. Night fell, and I reluctantly abandoned my efforts until the morning. My worry made it impossible to sleep through the little girl weeping outside my window, and begging to be let in. She's not in the rules. She only harasses members of my bloodline. I was almost relieved when the beast came, and dragged her off while she screamed in mortal terror, signaling that dawn was near. I threw on some clothing and jumped on my four-wheeler. I even skipped making coffee. I needed to see what had happened overnight. The man with the skull cup stood on the road, staring off into the trees, and calmly sipping the water inside like he was taking his morning tea. I pulled up close by and killed the engine so we could talk. "Skipped your coffee, did you?" he asked. "Want a drink?" "I am quite satisfied, but I will gladly accept if you wish to share," I replied with gritted teeth. That thin smile again. Now he was just messing with me. I looked in the direction he was staring. A slew of people, 12 in all, dangled in midair. For one brief, horrifying moment, I could only think of the time I'd found someone that hadn't heeded my rules. Their gutted body dangling uncomfortably close to my house, like it was a warning. How the police had let me do most of the work getting it down, while they waited on the ground with their damned paperwork. I don't make my staff clean up the remains. That's asking too much. These were alive. I almost wept with relief. They'd been pulled from their tents and stripped naked, then taken into the woods. Their bodies were covered with bruises and scratches from being violently dragged across the ground. Then they'd been hoisted up into the trees and left hanging by their ankles from the boughs. "Next time it'll be their flayed skins hoisted in the branches," the man said. "You should end this quickly." "I'm surprised by your concern." "I need people to share a drink with," he murmured. "I can't do that if everyone dies." I had to get my brother and both my uncles to help get the terrified campers down. They didn't fight much while we were doing this, just hung there limply, crying or whimpering softly. It made the job a lot easier. Dead weight is predictable, and we could pull them towards the ladder, get a good hold on them, and then cut the ropes and pass them down to the ground. Eliminate the one that started with it. As the abducted campers were taken off to the local hospital for treatment, I delegated the police paperwork to my brother and jumped on my four-wheeler. I returned to the camp that had bought the ice and called the man responsible aside for a conversation. I asked him if he'd bought the ice from some creepy children with no wagon, and when he said he had, I asked why he'd broken one of the rules of how to survive camping. It was rule number 18. Hadn't he read it? Oh, he said bleakly. That one. Well, there are a lot of rules. I took a breath, held it a moment, reminded myself that the majority of people have good intentions and don't do things simply to be contrary or cause trouble. That is my responsibility as both camp manager and a decent human being to be understanding and help people, because we have a common goal. I want them to have a safe and fun camping experience, so they come back, and they want to have a safe and fun camping experience so they can come back. This man didn't ignore my rules simply out of spite. It was an accident. An unfortunate accident. I asked him why he'd glossed over that rule. My tone was polite and friendly, without a hint of condemnation or judgment. That's the important bit. People respond in kind. So long as I didn't accuse, he wouldn't become defensive, and we could have a productive conversation. I've done a lot of reading on conflict resolution and behavioral change. He hadn't taken them seriously, he admitted. He'd certainly read them. Intently, in fact, because he thought it was a joke, but it was a clever joke, and he enjoyed it. But real? No. He pointed to his tent, showing how it had 3 feet of clearance between the other tents. Rule number 4. And that they'd brought a longer hose, so they didn't have to split the closer one more than 3 times. Rule number 6. The will was there. My system was flawed. It didn't change what I had to do. I thanked him for talking to me and walked away. Then I went into the woods and gathered some things. It took a while to find them all, but I'm familiar with my campsite, and I know where these things are likely to be found. Then I returned to my house with the mushrooms in hand. They're called Destroying Angel. Amanita virosa. I crushed it and took the resulting juice. Careful not to touch it with my bare hands, back to his camp. I poured it into his reusable water bottle, swirled it around to coat the sides, and then left it to dry. They wrote the initial symptoms off as mere food poisoning. By the time his campmates took him to the ER, he was suffering from liver and kidney failure. They did their best, but I had put a generous dose in that bottle, and his body simply could not keep up, not even with medical intervention. He was dead within 36 hours. The police dropped by, of course. I talked with them for a bit. We commiserated on how difficult it can be to protect people from themselves, and that was the end of it. They understand what it's like in the forest. I feel I am to blame. I know rules are ineffective, but they were easy, and that's what I relied on. I wrote off the deaths as isolated incidents, instead of warning signs, that I wasn't doing enough to determine if my rule list and other measures were accomplishing their intended purpose. You know what does help people change their behaviors? Storytelling. It's one of the most effective techniques. Far more effective than a list of rules, which according to research, is the least effective method, and the most prone to antisocial behavior, which is basically people deliberately sabotaging the system out of spite. Instead of telling someone, do this, you tell the person a story that demonstrates the behavior you want, preferably true, as that carries more weight, and the more personal it is, the more the individual will relate, and subsequently accept what you are trying to tell them to do. I'm a camp manager. I don't have a list of rules because I'm trying to ruin your fun. I have a list because I'm trying to help you from coming back to camp, and finding your tent collapsed and full of rainwater, and having no dry clothes or nowhere to sleep. I'm trying to keep you from spending half a day setting up tents, because you didn't plan where everything would go in advance, and I'm trying to keep you from doing small, simple things that could result in a horrific, and most assuredly, agonizing demise. I reside primarily in Southwest Virginia, where I do work as a fiction author for a small publishing company. Seeing as how I've been suffering from a bit of writer's block lately, I decided to take a spur-of-the-moment trip to Virginia Beach, completely unannounced. It's about a 6.5-hour drive, which may seem slightly ridiculous for a simple retreat. As a young child, however, My family and I used to regularly come to this beach for vacation, so I suppose being there just strikes a nostalgic chord in me somewhere. I arrived at the coastal city around sunset. I was so taken in by the sight of the golden amber sky, being held gently by the illustrious ocean, that I almost didn't notice that I was in what now seemed like a ghost town. Now don't get me wrong, Virginia Beach isn't Venice Beach, or anything even close. However, it was the tail end of summer in a bustling beachside city, with a population of roughly 500,000, and somehow there wasn't a soul around. I'd been to Florida once when they were suffering from a severe bout of red tide, so I presumed there was something similar going on at this beach. That was the only explanation I could think of that would explain why the entire beach and boardwalk was void of people. I was actually somewhat relieved initially, seeing as how I was coming here to get away from the distractions of everyday life anyways. I pulled into my hotel parking lot, a run-down but still decent and cheap Holiday Inn. The parking lot was empty too. I'm certainly never one to complain about rockstar parking, but my suspicion and wariness was mounting. I walked into the hotel lobby, cautiously approaching the front desk. I waited there for what must have been 5 minutes. I knew that I had arrived a bit later than expected, but surely there had to be someone working, I thought. But there was absolutely nobody. I poked my head over the receptionist counter, trying to see if there was any sign of life in the nearby vicinity. All I saw was a note with my name and room number written on it, with a room key taped to it. I found this very odd, but more unprofessional than anything. I swept aside my minor aggravation and tried to find the silver lining in my situation. Once again, I had to remind myself that I came here to escape any and all distractions in the first place. This included interactions with other people. Nonetheless, I couldn't escape this uneasy gut feeling I had that something was really, really wrong. I made my way towards the elevator, secretly hoping that the doors would open up to reveal at least one other person staying at this hotel. But of course, when the elevator doors opened, there was nobody inside. I reluctantly lumbered my overstuffed suitcase towards the elevator, prepared for my ride in solitude. My room was on the 12th floor, the top floor of this hotel, which meant that I had a long elevator ride up. This was when things started to become truly strange and unsettling. As I was coming up on the 4th floor, I could hear what distinctly sounded like footsteps running to the elevator doors, just as I moved up past the floor. I thought this seemed odd, but also slightly comforting to know that there was actually other people at this hotel. But then I heard the same thing for the next 3 floors. I shook it off as probably just being some kids running up and down the hallways, or something of that nature. The elevator then abruptly stopped once reaching the 9th floor. I expected the elevator doors to open and reveal a fellow hotel guest, but there was nobody. I slowly peered out of the elevator and down the adjacent hallway, scouring every inch of the carpeted corridor. Once again, there was nobody around. I shook my head, partly in mild irritation and partly out of confusion. Then I heard it again. Just as the elevator doors were nearly shut, the sound of footsteps came rushing towards me. Except this time they were louder, and followed with what sounded like a child's laughter. I was a bit spooked, and caught off guard to say the least. Again, I went with the most likely explanation of it being kids horsing around in the hallways. The rest of the ride up was non-eventful, thankfully. Upon reaching the 12th floor, I hurriedly made my way to my hotel room, and quickly locked the door behind me. I sat my suitcase down, and flicked on a bedside lamp, flooding the retro-looking hotel room in a blue fluorescence. The room smelled vaguely of stale cigarette smoke, which didn't bother me, since I'm a long-time smoker. I contemplated laying down on the bed for just a few minutes to get some much-needed rest. However, I knew that those few minutes would quickly turn into 20 minutes, which would then turn into a deep slumber. I shook off the desire and grabbed a half-empty pack of Camel Lights, along with my messenger bag. I then headed out to sit on my balcony and hopefully get some writing done. Upon opening the sliding door leading out to the balcony, I was immediately hit with the salty ocean air as I looked out onto the shore. I sat down in a flimsy, green lawn chair and began working on an outline for a horror screenplay that I had been commissioned to write. About 2 hours passed by before I realized how much writing I had actually gotten done. I'll admit that I was actually somewhat impressed with myself, seeing as how little I had written in the past year or so. I saved my work and turned off my laptop, ready to head back inside for a quick break before returning back to my writing. However, I noticed something strange in the reflection of my laptop screen before I closed it completely. At first I thought it was just a smudge on my screen. Upon closer inspection though, I saw that it was actually a woman. She was just standing right there in the middle of my hotel room. Terrified and in a state of shock, I quickly spun around to find my hotel room completely empty. I was quite confused initially, and thought that perhaps my fatigued mind was playing tricks on me. I slowly turned back around, and looked at the reflection on my laptop again. She was still there in the reflection, completely static and unwavering. But when I turned back around to look for her, she was gone. I had no idea what to do, or what was even going on. Perhaps I was just overreacting, and there was a rational explanation for all of this. However, I couldn't think of any. I tried to take a picture of her with my laptop camera, but she didn't show up in it either. Only in the reflection was I able to see her. I began to try and think of a plan to get out of this situation and off of this balcony. Going out the front door of my hotel room didn't seem like a likely option. I wasn't certain just yet if the mystery lady would indeed hurt or attack me, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of menace coming off of her. I looked over the guardrails and knew that jumping wasn't anything but a last resort. Leaping from the 12th floor would come certain death. In the back of my mind though, I knew that I'd rather jump and take my own life than to leave my fate in the hands of whatever was waiting for me inside. I tried to contact someone through my laptop, as it was linked to my cell phone that I stupidly left inside my hotel room, but as soon as I began typing out a message, my laptop suddenly died. Despite being nearly halfway charged, it didn't make any sense, but that didn't matter now. The screen dimmed to reveal the woman, except something about her was different now. It took me a minute to realize what it was. She had both of her arms outstretched, as if she was reaching for me, but she was still just standing there, completely frozen. I decided I needed to make a decision, and I needed to do it quick. I leaned one leg over the guardrail, struggling to gain my footing on the other side. I eventually got both legs around, so that I was facing the inside of my hotel room. I looked to my left and saw the leg of someone else sitting on the balcony of the room beside me. I called out to them, to try and get their attention, but they didn't budge or respond. I knew that I needed to get over there, but I also knew that all it took was one careless slip, and I would be plummeting to my death. I swung my left foot over and grabbed on the guardrail of the neighboring balcony. I was trying to get a firm grip with my left hand when I noticed that I could now see the woman. She was standing right at the sliding doors. It was still so dark outside that I couldn't make out any features on her. It was almost as if she was nothing but pure darkness. Afraid of her getting any closer to me, I decided to let my right hand go and try to swing my body over to the other balcony. My hands were too sweaty from the fear and anxiety, and I accidentally let go. The last thing I remember was falling backwards and looking up towards my balcony. I saw the shadow lady looking over the guardrail at me. She was just standing there, staring straight down at me, and then everything suddenly went black. I eventually came to after what seemed like days, to find that I was standing upright in my hotel room. I didn't know how I got there, but everything looked exactly the same, except it was darker in my room. Much darker, almost jet black. I looked down and couldn't even see my hands or feet. I tried to take a step forward, but found that I was completely unable to. It was as if I was paralyzed, yet still able to look around. That was when I noticed someone sitting out on the balcony. It was me. I didn't know how it was possible, but I was now watching myself sit out there and type as I did only a few hours, or however long before. I continued to watch myself act out everything in the exact same manner as I had done previously. I saw myself react to the shadow woman, who I now realized was me, and I watched in horror as I fell to my death. I tried to reach out to myself, but I was unable to move hardly at all, and definitely not quickly enough to save myself. I looked over the balcony just as I saw myself hit the ground. I watched as the blood began to seep out from underneath my mangled corpse. I sat down on the chair and picked up my laptop. I wasn't even controlling my actions at this point. It was as if I was just going through with the motions. I could see the reflection of the woman again on the screen. I knew it was actually me now, but I still felt afraid. Maybe more so now, as I was more confused than anything. I then began to type this out, as a cry for help almost. I don't know if anyone will even read this, and honestly, I don't know what you could do to help me even if you did. I fear that I may be stuck in some sort of loop that I am unable to escape from. I don't know how I entered this time loop, or what I'm supposed to do. All I know is that I need to figure out a plan to get away from the shadow person in my room, and off this balcony, even if that means falling to my death again.